Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Thursday, January 30th, day 482 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emmanuel Fabian. Hi, Manny. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda.
This morning, 8 hostages, 3 Israeli and 5 Thai, returned to Israel from Gaza, where they were taken by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad on October 7th, 2023. The Israelis are 20-year-old Agam Berger, the final surveillance officer among 7 young women taken hostage. She was released from the northern Gaza Strip in a staged ceremony this morning. Just before 1 p.m., 2 other Israeli civilians were released within a seething mob in Khan Younis in the southern Gaza Strip. And they are 29-year-old Arbel Yehoud, who was abducted from Kibbutz Nir Oz, and her fellow kibbutznik, Gadi Moshe, who is 80. We'll learn about their release, as well as what we know about the next steps for the IDF pullback in Gaza, and Saturday's projected release of 3 more Israeli hostages. All this and much, much more when we're back. Today was another emotional roller coaster of a day as 8 hostages held in Gaza were released. 79 of the 251 hostages abducted by Hamas on October 7th remain in Gaza, including the bodies of at least 34 confirmed dead by the IDF. To show U.S. support for Israel, U.S. President Donald Trump's Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff went to Hostages Square in Tel Aviv to meet with families of the hostages after a visit to a hospital where he visited the 4 IDF spotters Liri Albag, Naama Levi, Karina Ariev, and Daniel Gilboa, who released 5 days ago. They were waiting to reunite with Agam Berger, who was freed this morning. So, Manny, let's begin with the 20-year-old Agam Berger, who was the final surveillance officer of the 7 kidnapped on October 7th to go free. She was handed over to the Red Cross at around 10 a.m. this morning and accompanied back to Israel and reunited with her family in a very, shall we say, decorous way. What do we know about Agam's health currently?
As far as we understand, she's relatively good physical condition. She was able to walk during the Hamas ceremony. She's standing, so we don't know of any unusual sort of medical case, with her situation right now. She wasn't. If there was a situation where she required urgent medical care, she would have been taken immediately to a hospital and not to the IDF facility near the border. But so from that, we understand that she is in relatively good health. Of course, now she's at a hospital, she will undergo much more extensive checks by the hospital to make sure that she's fine. She'll remain under observation, likely for more than a week there.
And as I mentioned, she was released from the northern Gaza Strip in a decorous ceremony, which we've come to expect. She was, of course, given one of those so-called gift bags. And I assume that releasing her from there was a statement on the part of Hamas. Would you agree with that, Manny?
Yeah, so she was released again in a sort of a bit of a show that Hamas put on. They brought up a stage. They made the Red Cross sign documents there. She was given the gift bag. She was told to sort of put it up for the camera, this sort of certificate that she got, and wave to the camera. But it was very, I would say, orderly, and it went by very quickly. And she was sort of put on the stage for about 25 seconds, waved, and then back to the Red Cross and taken away, which is very, very much unlike what we saw later in the morning in Khan Younis with the release of the other 2 Israelis and 5 Thai nationals.
Exactly. The release of Arbel Yehoud, Gadi Moshe, and 5 Thai nationals in southern Gaza's Khan Younis was completely different, with swarms of armed militants, and they were at the location of Yehia Sinwar's now destroyed house. So Arbel and Gadi were held captive by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group. And just to remind our listeners, before we dive into their handover, Kibbutz Nir Oz was one of the hardest hit locations of the October 7th massacre, and about 1 in 4 residents was either murdered or taken hostage. So we have Gadi Moshe, who is 80, Arbel, who is 29, and just seeing them come out in a swarm of armed militants. A person next to me said it's like Arbel is walking the Via Dolorosa. It was so disturbing to watch. So Manny, tell us about their handover as opposed to, of course, Agam's.
So you said you could see them. To be honest, I couldn't even see them in the crowd. It was so difficult to see them. There was a closer video showing Arbel, but with Gadi Moshe, there you could not see him in the crowd. So many, hundreds, maybe even thousands of Palestinians in the area. Of course, many of them were members of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. It was just not organized at all. It took much longer than what it should have been. And Israel has now sent, obviously, messages to the mediators demanding that this sort of thing doesn't happen again. Israel would, it's horrible to say this, but would much prefer to see Hamas's organized stage and show that they put on. Much less chaos there. This was just really horrific to see, and it lasted for a very, very long time because just hundreds of Palestinians were banging on the car which was holding the hostages, not letting them go through. They wanted to try and parade them near or through Sinwar's ruins, the house of the ruins of his house. That didn't really happen in the end, and eventually they just kind of moved them through a few dozen meters of the crowd. But it was just really, really horrific, and Israel is demanding that not happen again.
You know, when we were watching this play out, we switched between several different live streams, and one of the live streams that we were watching was from an Arabic news channel. And one of the comments on the YouTube channel was in Arabic, said that this treatment was in vengeance for the humiliation that Palestinian security prisoners receive as well. Meaning perhaps it was quite intentional. We think perhaps it was disorganized, but maybe it was very organized, and maybe this was exactly the message that Palestinian Islamic Jihad wanted to get across, as opposed to Hamas, who is trying to be more statesman-like. What do you think?
I mean, Hamas is definitely trying to prove, at least internally, to the Palestinians in Gaza that it is in charge of the Strip, and that it has control and has supposedly defeated the IDF. That's the message it's trying to show to locals in Gaza. Islamic Jihad, I'm really not sure what their message was here. All it showed was that they weren't in control at all of the situation. It only became under control when Hamas stepped in and pushed back the crowd and was the one to basically move the two Israeli hostages and the 5 Thai nationals to the Red Cross. So whatever Islamic Jihad was message that we're trying to get across, all it showed was that they are a very disorganized terror group and have no real control over the situation.
And what do we know about the health of these 7 hostages who just came out?
So as we were recording, they've only just arrived at the IDF facility near the border. That too, they'll undergo an initial checkup. So I don't know exactly yet what their situation is. Probably by the time this is published, we'll have more information on their exact conditions. But from what we know, if they're not being taken straight to a hospital, that does mean that they are in relatively good condition. There could be many other complications or injuries that they're facing that they will need treatment for, though.
And of course, Palestinian Islamic Jihad released a video this morning ahead of the release of Arbel Yehoud and Gadi Moshe, in which we saw the 2 Israeli hostages stand on their feet, hug each other. We're learning very slowly what Arbel's conditions are. What have you heard so far?
So that video was apparently filmed maybe last night, maybe a day or 2 ago, just before they were being released. There's a report that Arbel Yehoud was actually held alone for most of her captivity, or even for the entire captivity. We still don't know to verify this yet. We'll see once she speaks to her family, and then this news will probably come out. But it was a very touching video that Islamic Jihad put out, showing both of them from the same kibbutz, reuniting again before being released. And we'll see. We'll have to wait for more information once she's back in Israel with her family. And then we'll start getting more news about what exactly she went through and the other hostages went through during captivity.
We'll go to a short break. And we're back. Manny, how many hostages are being held by Hamas versus other groups? Do we have this information at this time?
It's hard to say. I don't have an exact number, but we do know that there are additional hostages still being held by Islamic Jihad. Sasha Trofanov, for example, Russian-Israeli civilian who's been held by Islamic Jihad. Islamic Jihad has published videos of him. So we do know that at least him and possibly several others are being held by Islamic Jihad. There are other smaller terror groups that supposedly were also holding hostages at some point. Hamas may have taken those hostages from them at certain points during the war. But in the end, it doesn't really matter that much because Hamas is the organization that Israel struck this deal with, and they are then responsible for releasing the hostages regardless of which terror group they're being held by. So Hamas has the responsibility to release even the ones that are being held by Islamic Jihad and other terror organizations.
What can we look forward to on Saturday, do you think? We still don't have any kind of sense of who is meant to be released, do we?
We do know one name that has been reported. Keith Siegel is reportedly one of the three to be released on Saturday. And as far as I understand, the three will be three living elderly men. Of course, things can change. We've seen how Hamas has, at the last minute, changed the list of the hostages and done things that are unacceptable to Israel, like delaying the release of Arbel Yehoud. So we don't know exactly yet, but Keith Siegel is likely to be released on Saturday.
And of course, much of the world is looking for information about the Bibas family. And have we received any kind of certain information from Hamas so far?
So Hamas did give Israel a list, not a list, more like a number of the hostages that are living and dead in the group of 33. It's now much lower, of course, because several have been released. But in that group, how many are living, how many are dead? And then the army then notified the families that Israel already has concerns for their life to tell them that this is that their loved ones are either likely dead or possibly dead, or that under those kind of words. Israel doesn't know for sure in any of these cases, and it's not like Hamas has previously said that the Bibas mother Shiri and two children, Ariel and Kfir, have died. What does it matter if they tell Israel again? Do we still trust Hamas? It's still Hamas telling Israel. It's not anything for certain. So Israel will need to wait for their actual release. But several families, 8 families, have been told that the likelihood of their loved ones returning not alive is very possible. Those who are definitely alive also have been told, and there are several cases where it's quite uncertain as to what happened to their fate. With Bibas, of course, Israel has grave concerns. It has done for more than a year now, I think, and Hamas has previously said that they have been killed.
Earlier in the week, the IDF pulled back somewhat on the Netzarim corridor in order to allow Gazans to begin returning to the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Of course, this morning at Agam Berger's ceremony, quote-unquote ceremony, we saw many of these new or returning residents. Manny, what else is changing on the ground in the Strip for the IDF in the meantime?
Right now, it's we don't know exactly what's going to happen yet, but supposedly under the deal, the Rafah crossing will open soon for Palestinians. It's supposed to open once all the female hostages, both soldiers and civilians, are released. So that could be the next sort of IDF movement in Gaza, is not withdrawing from the Philadelphia corridor, the Egypt-Gaza border area, but just around the crossing to reopen it for Palestinians to leave Gaza, including members of Hamas. Under the agreement, Israel has agreed to allow 50 members of Hamas a day to leave Gaza, those that Israel approves sort of manually each one. That would be the next movement. Otherwise, Israel's mostly staying in its positions. It's still deployed in the Netzarim corridor, just only on the very edge of it, the area that's closest to Israel. And Palestinians are freely moving from southern Gaza back to the north. I will note that while we have seen reports from Hamas and the UN saying that 300,000 plus Palestinians have returned to northern Gaza, I'm not quite sure that all of them have stayed. We saw video footage, television footage showing Palestinians actually returning back to the south because they found nothing to return to in the north. And at Agam Berger's release ceremony today in Jabalia, very few Palestinian civilians around the area. In Gaza City, in the release last week, there was a pretty large crowd. Maybe several dozen were in Jabalia today. Jabalia, of course, one of the sites of the more intensive fighting between Israel and Hamas during the war. Pretty much every single building there is destroyed. So there isn't anything to return to. So it makes sense that not many civilians were there to watch the handover because there's just nowhere to stay there.
I will note that at both of the ceremonies, I personally did not see one non-Israeli woman there. And I don't know what that signifies, but it was definitely stark in terms of the masses gathered there.
Yeah, it is mostly men and children. There were some young girls there, I think I saw in some of the clips, but and there was also a few women I did see, especially in the Hamas propaganda images that they published, showing women throwing candy and confetti on the Hamas terrorists during the handover. But that's about it. Among the crowds was mostly men and children.
So this morning, the IDF announced that Hamas terrorist Mohammed Abu Asid, who was filmed kidnapping Israeli surveillance soldier Na'ama Levi on October 7th, 2023, was eliminated in a drone strike some 4 months ago. So the question is, why release this information this morning? Na'ama, of course, was released from captivity 5 days ago.
So Israel was concerned that publishing this information, which has been pretty much public already for 4 months, but publishing it officially could jeopardize the surveillance soldiers being held by Hamas and maybe jeopardize their release by the terror group. So Israel wanted to wait until the last of the surveillance soldiers were freed by Hamas. Literally the moment Agam Berger crossed the border, we got a message saying, you can publish this now, it's now permitted. So that's why it wasn't released. But if you go check online and you search Mohammed Abu Asid, you can find posts on his killing from 4 months ago. Palestinian media published this, but they were able to identify him and that he was killed in the strike. But Israel refused to comment on it until today.
Finally, Manny, just to close, let's take a short look at our northern border with Syria and Lebanon. And this morning, I believe the IDF shot down a drone, a Hezbollah drone. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was a surveillance drone that was shot down over the border between Lebanon and Israel. This morning, the IDF says that it was intercepted by the Israeli Air Force using a ground-based air defense system like the Iron Dome or something similar. And it does mark the first sort of incident like this during the ceasefire with Hezbollah. We haven't seen them try to launch drones at Israel. A surveillance drone in any case, not an explosive drone, but still a violation of the ceasefire. We have seen several IDF strikes in Lebanon in the last few days. There was one against a convoy of vehicles that Hezbollah was using to move weaponry around. So the ceasefire is holding, but it's definitely shaky. There's definitely violations by Hezbollah and the IDF responding to these cases. And I don't know if Israel will respond to this surveillance drone and strike in Lebanon in response, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
And the ceasefire was officially extended to February 18th. It officially ran out on Sunday, and it was extended. Let's turn to Syria as well. And there is a pretty firm statement from our defense minister, Yisrael Katz, yesterday about the Israel and the buffer zone.
Yeah, so Katz has said, and he says a lot of things, but one of the things he said was that Israel will remain in Syria, in the buffer zone and on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon indefinitely. The army, on the other hand, in its statement when it published information about how it's supplying the soldiers up there for the winter months, it's very snowy and very high altitude there, stressed, and I say this several times in their press release, that the army posts up there are temporary. And it said that quite a few times in the statement, that they're temporary posts and it's all temporary and all can be taken down. So I don't know how long the army will stay up there. We thought the army would stay in the Netzarim corridor indefinitely, and we've seen now that they've almost completely withdrawn from the entire corridor. So right now, the army is on atop the Mount Hermon, the Syrian side, and in the buffer zone indefinitely. But I do think that there will come a time where Israel does withdraw from Syria and not stay there really forever.
Okay, for this and all other matters, please check out our live blog, a hugely changing story. Of course, today we have as well the prisoner releases that are beginning to happen as we're speaking. Manny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.